creators pick up the brief, bring that brief to life in their own creative style, release the content onto YouTube, and we then evaluate the metrics off the back end of the YouTube API, and then we score it using the competition metrics within Bittensor. So content creators are essentially competing against each other and are scored on the attention and the engagement that they can generate.
And then let's give an example of a specific brief. What was the first brief that you guys had?
First brief was essentially to educate on detail. So each brief, it basically has an overall description, but then it will also contain a few bullet points that need to be hit. So it will be explain this, highlight this point. And yeah, as long as you hit the brief, you are then eligible for scoring on engagement.
And then for that scoring on engagement, you guys are using YouTube videos. How do you score the briefs? How do you judge if the brief was, or if the video was about the brief? How do you know which video is better than the other? How does that look?
Yeah, so there's two parts to it. There's verifying the relevance of the video and that they've successfully hit the brief. So very simply, that is taking the YouTube transcript, taking the YouTube description for the video, and feeding that into an LLM along with the brief, and that will give us a green light that they've hit the brief. And then beyond that, the key metric that we're looking at is minutes watched on the video. And the way that we're getting this data is through the backend YouTube Analytics API and YouTube Data API. So at the moment, we're collecting tons and tons of data from these YouTube accounts that goes far beyond just minutes watched, and we plan to add complexity as we try and guide this to its final destination. But at the moment, quite simply, minutes watched, 7-day moving average, and that's your score.
And how do you think that this system will redefine content creation, or is that the goal here? What is the goal of this system?
So, I mean, going back to what I said before about knowing the pitfalls of both sides of how content creators react with brands, like this whole concept is basically built for scaling that, breaking down barriers. Essentially, what we want to do is remove all the admin that content creators are having to do with brands to come up with the contracts, to come up with the negotiations. We're getting rid of all of that. It just means creators can spend more time on creating content. They're also now being rewarded directly based on their engagement. So it just means that they're going to be fine tuning their skills. They're going to get more time to actually do that and make more effective content. So yeah, and as well, like the actual market, the actual model is quite novel. So usually a brand, if they wanted to sign a contract, a content creator, it's either going through an agency where you've got middlemen involved and it's still quite time onerous, or it's reaching out to content creators themselves. And you might contact like, 1, 2, 3 content creators, come up with your contract, agree your price. BitCast is totally different. The way it works, you publish your brief as a brand, and then you're going to get hundreds of creators spreading your message, all within a certain time frame. You're going to get mass noise and mass education about your topic and your brand and whatever it is that you want to shout about, I suppose. So it's a totally different flip on how this industry works. And yeah, we just, as we get more and more creators on board, that creates more and more value. And that just means that the briefs become more and more valuable, and the demand on those briefs is going to increase. And it's just going to turn into this flywheel of value within our subnet. Yeah, we think we've come up with a very, very novel approach that is vastly improved on the current situation.
And you said you ran a social media account with 60,000 followers and you had partnerships or sponsors. How did that look? And then how would that look on BitCast in your specific case with that social media account?
So, well, firstly, that account is on Instagram, so it's not a YouTube account. But I suppose the essence is the same, isn't it? So, previously, I would be having brands contact me all the time. I would have to personally separate the wheat from the chaff, I suppose, where you've got brands that just, I'm not interested in publishing content about that. Or you might go into conversations with them, over just DMs and spend a lot of time speaking to them. And then the deal doesn't actually materialize. And there's a lot of that. Even when you do get the deal, it is still quite an onerous process. And then you've got to go through exactly what they want, like when they want it to be dropped. And then there's a lot of toing and throwing. And even on their side, there's a lot of effort involved in that as well. So yeah, to be honest, it was quite a frustrating experience. Obviously, there's still value there, so I was doing it, but in the end, I actually stopped doing it because it was getting that onerous and that frustrating to carry on with.
A big point I think people might say is, since miners are essentially anyone or anything, how do you quality control for, like, a company comes in, they say, hey, do this, I want a ad for this. How do you quality control and deliver, I guess, a product or result back to somebody?
Yeah, so I suppose first thing is the brief has to be well written. A poor brief could lead to poor quality. But we find that the system can handle quite a detailed brief. And the briefs are very flexible, so you can put different constraints even on potentially the sentiment of the message or the exactly what information should be contained in the content. So I think a well-written brief is the first thing. Secondly, because we're going in through the back-end YouTube APIs, we can collect a huge amount of data. We can see this isn't all necessarily stuff that we're using at the moment, but it's all there for us when we do want it. But you can see the demographics, the countries of the audiences. So there's a lot more nuance to than just looking at purely engagement. We can actually go a lot deeper, and we hope to be able to offer more bespoke services to brands in the future, where they can choose exactly what type of engagement they want. Yeah, anything to add on that, Tom?
I suppose just touch on the point about which brands to work with as well. Obviously, we're targeting Bittensor at the moment, and we're gonna stick with Bittensor content for like our first phase, I suppose. But when our network of creators builds up to a point where we think we can expand into, Web3 in general, then we'll make that leap and we'll start working with brands outside of just Bittensor. And I suppose from that point, we are planning on moving into Web 2 as well. But again, that will come at a point when we believe our network of creators can provide value within that space. So it's going to be a natural progression. And really, the Bittensor ecosystem is like a launch pad where we can fine tune our skills for this subnet, and also for us to build our initial miners and content creators out. And basically we're going to be building up on which brands to work with and selecting them carefully, I suppose, in the outset.
And you said this first phase is going to be focused on Bittensor and Bittensor content creators. How do you increase the scope of that over time?
Well, it's a flywheel, and we think we have a really clean, tight flywheel, which is centered around a path to revenue that's quite short. So the brief that goes live tomorrow is the first Bittensor subnet that we'll be promoting, and it is Subnet 93. So we hope that we're looking forward to the content that comes out for that. I think including this very podcast. So I think when people see that, I think we'll be able to demonstrate the quality of the content that's being generated and the value that we can give to a subnet. And I think there'll be once we've done that and we've sort of proven that concept, I wouldn't be surprised if we have a long line of subnets lining up to be next on. So that's basically our path to revenue. Is we want to be able to sell brief spots to subnets, and the flywheel is essentially putting that revenue into alpha buybacks to send the alpha token price up, which will in turn send the emissions up and the quality of the content creators up, and so it'll continue.
And you mentioned selling to other subnets. Would this look like a pure transaction in the Web 2 world, or would this be based off the percent of alpha token they hold? They get determine what the briefs are.
Yeah, we'd like to experiment with different models, and we'll switch it up. I think moving to a model where we reward staking, high stakes of alpha with being able to promote a certain topic is a really interesting path, and possibly takes a bit more thought. Way simpler than that to start with is probably just we'll ask a subnet to either buy and burn some more of our alpha, or we ask them for some tau and then we use that as a buyback ourselves. So those are the sort of models that we'll experiment with.